Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast. And today's guest is Andrew Hume, who's the MD of Thor Energy, a dual-listed exploration company focused on the natural hydrogen and helium, with a significant footprint in the highly prospective South Australian region. In addition to their clean energy focus, they maintain a diverse portfolio of strategic metal projects, which include uranium, copper, nickel, tungsten, lithium, and gold across Australia and the US, offering investors exposure to a range of commodities. A geologist by background, Andrew has over 27 years experience in the energy sector, holding key roles in multinational companies across business and technical disciplines, principally in the US, Australia, Denmark, and the UK. He's recently joined the company at the beginning of the year, and he's going to give us an overview of Thor Energy, news around the hydrogen market, updates on their projects, and their plans for the future. Just want to give us a shout out to our sponsors, Hawcroft, who are leaders in property risk management in the mining industry since 1992. They offer insurance risk surveys, construction risk reviews, and asset criticality assessments, and more. They work across 600 sites globally, and they support all areas of mining and mineral extraction. So if you're looking for any property and insurance risk management services, then please visit their website at www.hawcroft.com. All the details are in our show notes. Andrew, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Hi, Rob. Thanks for having me. Doing well today.
Good to hear. Good to hear. So, as these podcasts always start off, I wondered if you can tell the audience a little bit about yourself. As I mentioned in the introduction, you've been in the energy sector for all of your career. So for those that don't know you, I just wanted you to just run us through your career from when you sort of graduated, how you got into the industry, and obviously working for the various companies that you've worked for up to sort of present day.
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Rob. 27 years, that feels like a long time now. So I did my first degree, Bachelor of Geology with honours at St Andrews in Scotland, famous for its golf as well. So had a good time there. And when I graduated, I was very lucky to get a job straight out of that after graduation, working for an English company called Racal Electronics. They had a survey division, and we would basically go offshore, you doing 2D seismic, hydrographic work, sampling the seabed, etc., all in the service of the oil and gas industry, for shallow hazards before you drill a well, or for fiber optics or pipelines to make sure that the seabed conditions were suitable for laying those. So I worked offshore for a couple of years, graduated my way up, and eventually found myself in HQ for the company in London. Spent a year there working with the board quite closely, which was good time. And then I moved with that company to the US, where I became the geosciences manager, looking after a survey fleet of boats and some of the processing side of things, a lot of the marketing, a lot of the sales and contractual side of that company. And then it was at that time, actually, the company was taken over by a French company. In fact, it was a merger between Racal Electronics and Marconi. And they became renamed as Thales, or Thales, Thales, back in 2002, something like that. Shortly after that time, I moved to Shell, went back sort of more to a technical role for a few years, part of a team initially that was trying to crack a big drilling problem that we're having in the Gulf of Mexico. It's called shallow water flows, but basically when they were drilling these very deep, expensive wells in the shallow section, they were getting influxes of water and other brines into the wellbore, which was destroying the wellbore, had potential health and safety implications, but was moreover was costing the industry an absolute fortune. So I was lucky to work with a really really great group of experts within Shell, and interacting with some of the other big companies, the usual suspects who had similar issues. And we kind of figured out a good way of avoiding this thing to happen when we drill deep wells, and also to know how to intervene when we if the issue came along. So then my career progressed. I got more involved in exploration and appraisal, again, deepwater Gulf of Mexico initially. Spent about 5 or 6 years all told in the US before moving with Shell to Perth in Australia, where I'm sitting today. Spent another 3 or 4 years with Shell, both operating and running teams on operated exploration, but also looking after some non-operated activities. The Northwest Shelf Venture Gas, which Woodside operated or operates still. I was sort of looking after Shell's interests from a technical, semi-commercial point of view there for a few years. And then in 2010, I moved to Murphy, an American oil company, but who had just opened an office in Perth, and I was one of the first people to be involved in that structure here. We grew from a team of 2 or 3 or 4 up to about 30 a few years later. Drilled a bunch of wells, acquired new acreage, farmed out of acreage, did all kinds of deals. It was a fun time, actually. And then in 2016, I was invited to join Maersk Oil in Denmark. So it was a great opportunity to move with my family to Denmark. We spent 4 years in Denmark. First couple were with Maersk, where I was in charge of regional new ventures and business development in West Africa. And then latterly, I was the 2IC, the second in command, for exploration and production for Maersk Oil globally. In 18, Total, they were called Total at the time, now it's Total Energies, bought Maersk Oil, and I stayed with that organization and became second in command again for the region, for the North Sea, Russia area. Great time. We had this a task of bringing Maersk and Total together, 5 or 6 officers, 60, 70 different people from around the world, and trying to forge a team that was effective. And I think we did a good job. And then in 2020, the famous COVID year that we all have our own memories and sufferings and pains, I just decided to do my MBA, which I've been accepted to do in the UK. And when COVID hit, I had a choice to make of actually moving back to Australia, potentially Paris, or to move to Scotland. And so I moved with Total Energies to Aberdeen, where I was responsible for business development and managing a big portfolio of joint ventures, mostly operated, some non-operated, exploration, appraisal, and actually development as well for a big transboundary gas development called Tommeliten Alpha, which is part of Ecofisk now and is on production. Did that for a few years, graduated with my MBA from Cambridge back in 2022. And then the last couple of years up in Aberdeen, I was working on a project which was Shell, BP and Total, with a goal of decarbonising their big offshore production facilities by using offshore floating wind, power from shore, and basically just trying to clean all of that system up. That project's still ongoing. And then at the end of last year, we decided it was time to come back to Australia. I was keen to continue my own journey and be involved more in the renewable side of things and the sort of the lower carbon side of the industry. And that's when I met up with the guys from Thor, and lo and behold, at the beginning of this year, back in Perth, Australia, I came on board as MD. So there we go.
Yeah. Thanks for giving us your a snapshot of your career. I suppose before we start speaking about Thor Energy, I just wondered, you've been in the role for 4 months now. What are some of the major differences in terms of working for all the energy companies that you've been working for? And I suppose some of them are big, obviously large organisations and global, to them working in the mining industry for a junior miner. What are some of the big differences that you've noticed already so far? Maybe some of the biggest challenges that you're either facing or about to face?
Yeah, I think the short answer is less sleep. It's a very different world. I mean, Total, Shell, Maersk, they all employ 100,000 plus people globally, are in tens, if not hundreds of countries each. Which is great. It's wonderful working for these companies. You get exposed to some amazing projects, multi-billion-dollar projects with industry experts, and it's really wonderful. Working as I do now in this SME environment is wonderful for different reasons. You've got, I think, in the bigger companies, it's hard to make change. Things move a bit slower. There's always more people that are required to approve and approve and approve. In the SME world, we find that there's obviously more responsibility on the individual, on myself and others, and that's fun. It's obviously can be stressful at times, but it's much more fun, I think, to work in this environment where I'm now able to really be sort of leading at the technical level, the geological side of things, but also on the on the commercial side of things, on the asset management side of things. And the biggest learnings from me, to answer your question, is the exposure and the interaction with the ASX in Australia, and we're also listed on the UK Stock Exchange under AIM. So it's learnings that I've really come across over the last few months, and I'll continue to do so. It's just finding the right ways to interact, the necessity to govern, correctly with those stock exchanges. So that's what I find is the biggest difference. But in truth, it's quite an enjoyable journey. It's quite good fun.
Yeah, and I suppose following on from that, what would be the major differences between the energy sector and the mining industry that you've picked up? Maybe that's from a technical perspective, or maybe from an industry perspective. Again, what are you seeing as the big major differences from the differences between the actual two industries?
Well, there are, aren't they? I think first of all, it's worthwhile me just describing a little bit about where Thor is today, and our portfolio, and sort of the strategy that we're going through, because we're in a bit of we've kind of just gone through a change. We're coming out the other side now. So basically, before I joined the company this year, prior to that, we got a new executive chairman and some new NEDs that came on board last year. I've done a really good job of looking at what the portfolio had developed into and starting the rationalization project, because we ended up with a little bit of a portfolio that's a little bit perhaps too diverse. Well, not a bad portfolio, but could certainly do with some rationalization. So the guys started that up last year, and then that's my job to push forward this year. And in fact, we got rid of one of our licenses in Western Australia just a couple of months ago. But the idea, basically, strategically, is to really focus down and keep the key assets from the legacy portfolio, which involves understanding a little bit more about those, but also potentially looking for other avenues for some of the projects that perhaps don't quite fit our portfolio as well. Say find commercial routes out of those over the course of the next year or two, perhaps. So then what we've done, though, at the same time, is we've concluded a deal with a company called Go Exploration, who are Australian based, and they developed a really, let's say world-class natural hydrogen and helium portfolio, which we've acquired 80.2% of. So what that leaves us with now, in terms of, your original question was, how does it contrast between big oil and gas players and mining? And I find myself in a company where the mining aspects are still absolutely important. And there's things I'm learning about the ways the industry work and the different players and some of the different contractors and things like that are involved. But then the natural hydrogen and helium space is actually quite akin to the oil and gas exploration and appraisal and production world, in that we ultimately drill wells to hopefully find pockets of hydrogen and helium in the subsurface, just as we would for natural oil and gas. The idea would be to produce them and produce that volume in a similar process, if you like, to oil and gas as well. The difference comes to once you've got the hydrogen and or helium at the surface. If it was oil and gas, you'd have to go through a lot of filtering, a lot of processing into the refining process and into that downstream market. Whereas hydrogen and helium points to different markets. Hydrogen, whether it be industrial, whether it's part of the oil and gas refining process, oil refining process, steel, etc., or whether it goes straight into energy production in the form of electricity or into the natural gas system. And of course, helium has its own markets, the one that's growing rapidly at the moment, of course, is its use in semiconductors and chips. So it is different, and the mining clearly is different to oil and gas. But I think collectively, it doesn't feel too different, if you like, from my position, at least at the moment.
Yeah. As you've mentioned, obviously you've transitioned from traditional mining to obviously focus on natural hydrogen and helium exploration. What motivated this obviously strategic shift, and how does it align with the company's long-term vision?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, I think that what I find attractive about the company, and it's the investment pitch, if you like, of the company, is also what I've just bought into personally. From a career point of view, the move from the big oil and gas company to a much smaller company, the move away from oil and gas focus and to purely onto, well, not purely, but largely onto the natural hydrogen and helium is a big change for me in many regards, but it's also an incredibly exciting one. Natural hydrogen and helium, we're in a very nascent, a very embryonic, a very young industry, and in many regards it has some of those same sort of hallmarks that the oil and gas industry would have had 100, 150, 60 years ago, something like that, before drilling those famous wells in the USA, where the industry was looked on as kind of, what is this crazy industry? And we all know what that industry evolved into over the course of the following century. And so now, I'm not saying that natural hydrogen is going to have necessarily the absolute scale of oil and gas, but it has a lot in common. It's a very exciting place to be. It's got massive growth potential. This really could be part of the global energy solution going forward. And obviously be very prosperous associated with that. So for me, it's very exciting. It feels entrepreneurial. While Thor's been around for 20 odd years, we're still small. We're very fleet-footed. We have an entrepreneurial attitude, and that's very exciting. And it was also part of one of my reasons to leave this, these big companies, which have all, have a lot going for them. Don't get me wrong, but working in a smaller company gives you more ability to instigate change, to bring some of the learnings over from oil and gas and try to apply them to this sector. And as I say, I think it's got huge running room, which inspires me personally, and I think is a good news story for Thor itself.
Yeah, as we mentioned, most of your career has been in the oil and gas industry. How do you plan on leveraging your experience to drive the company's initiatives, obviously in the natural hydrogen sector? And what specifically about this project, and I suppose companies, has motivated you to join Thor Energy?
Yeah, so I think there's probably two answers to the first question about how do I apply my sort of background and skill. As I say, we're going to be more largely focused on the natural hydrogen and helium in South Australia, and that, from a technical point of view, the geology is largely similar. There's some nuances to that, as we all know. There's a lot of nuances to that, but sort of the oil and gas sector is probably most closely aligned to hydrogen and helium. And a lot of the people in our peer companies have come from a similar approach, largely working for some of the bigger international oil and gas companies, and applied their skills over into this sector, which is what I'm doing. So my knowledge helps me understand the geology, where's the right place to look, where's the right place, what are the right techniques we're going to need to employ, geochemistry, seismic, some of the more esoteric techniques perhaps, and remote sensing. And ultimately, where should we drill and how do we go about drilling is something that plays to my skills inherently. I think also the oil and gas industry is slightly different from my understanding from the sort of the traditional mining side of things, where joint ventures are far more common. Working closely with other players is quite a common way of doing things. And whilst that's not exactly where we are in the market today, I sense that that's probably the way that the industry will evolve. And obviously I've got quite a lot of experience there. So I think I bring a lot of that inherent knowledge over. It's quite a natural fit for me into that oil and gas space. And then remind me of the second part of your question, Rob, about Thor.
Yes. So I suppose what has specifically about this particular project motivated you to join the company, based obviously on your previous experience?
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so the geology in our area is really very interesting. I won't go into huge detail, but it's in this interesting part of South Australia where we have a very old cratonic mass, goes back 2.5, 3 billion years old, and we sit in what's called the Adelaide geosyncline. So it's an area where it's sort of like a failed rift, an infill with relatively young material, and what that's set up is a really geologically fascinating area. We've got high basement blocks. We've got old mountain belts that have been eroded away in the northern part of our main license. We've got known discovered natural hydrogen and helium very close by, 50 kilometers away as the crow flies. That sort of order of magnitude, and then also along geological strike as well. So we know we're in a very good place geologically. And I guess I'm a geologist by heart, and that's very attractive. But I think the other thing about this acreage, which really I find very interesting, again, it was part of my motivation to join Thor, is that where it's located is also very strategically placed for market and the downstream side of things. Hydrogen doesn't transport well. We're learning about that as an industry. We've gone through a bit of an education, let's say, over the last few years. There's been a lot of hype about green hydrogen, been lots of hype about the global economy, global hydrogen economy. And I think that's coming, don't get me wrong, but I think we're realizing it's harder and more expensive and harder to scale than perhaps everyone was envisaging a few years ago. And one of the advantages we have of our licenses, and our license adjacent to the high range license next to Adelaide, is we're right next door to the city of Adelaide. There is some industry there that needs hydrogen. There's also potential with green steel, energy provision to mine sites, and some other slightly more remote facilities, shall I say. But intrinsically, you have a population of 1.5 million people with very good natural gas supply that goes right through our license, with high voltage transmission lines that go right through our license. And so when it comes to this license, when we move forward and we drill wells and hopefully make some discoveries, we have an ability to market very easily with very low barriers to entry, very low cost, or even potentially if we find something big, we could get some early production by way of creating electrons to go into the system or to commingling the natural gas into the natural gas supply. So that the project itself I find very interesting, and that's again why I was drawn to it, and I think it fits to a lot of my natural capabilities. And I guess in the last couple of years when I was in Total, I was working on, as I said earlier, on this big decarbonisation project, which was essentially electrifying these offshore facilities. So I've developed some experience understanding, the energy transmission side of things as well, and I think that can, that can dovetail quite nicely with this project.
Natural hydrogen exploration is gaining more momentum globally, but Australia is still emerging in this space. How would you characterise South Australia as a jurisdiction for hydrogen development? I suppose both in terms of infrastructure and governmental support.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Globally, the most of the activity over the last few years has been the central USA, Kansas, Nebraska, sort of that neck of the wood, Colorado, that middle area. It's had a lot of the activity. It's had a lot of the investment. There's some big names like the Bill Gates of this world and the Bezoses and people like that have invested some money into that activity. Those licenses over there are generally quite small. In Australia, we're looking to have big licenses to really try and high grade where the best location is. But that notwithstanding, that's where the money's been. There's been increasing amounts of activity in Europe as well, and a few other parts of the planet. So I always say Australia's 2-3 years behind in terms of the activity that's happened there. We have had some activity here. The company that sits adjacent to Thor in South Australia drilled a couple of wells 18 months ago to prove up the results that were found in a well that was drilled back in 1930 or something like that. So we're not starting from nothing. The industry's been going here for a number of years, 4 or 5 years. Go Exploration's been going for 2 or 3 years. The company that we bought or 80%, 80.2% of that we bought, and they've done a lot of work as well. So we're not starting from absolute zero by any stretch of the imagination, but we're definitely a couple of years behind. And I think that's a couple of years behind in terms of the activity, but it's also a couple of years behind in terms of the investment and the sort of the market value of Australia versus America, for instance. And I think that's coming. I think there's lots of industry gossip and that says that we're going to start to see more investment coming into Australia.
Yeah.
South Australia in particular is, again, I mentioned it earlier, and specifically to the High Range project. I think it's a very good place for us. I think we've got a key license that gives us the right geology, gives us an easy source, market side of things as well, sales side of things. But larger than that, South Australia really has established itself as, without doing a disservice to the other states and territories, it's really established itself as the leader in terms of the legislation, regulations, and sort of the support we're seeing from the South Australian government to allow us to do the things we want to do. So again, we're probably a year or two ahead of those other states as well. So South Australia is the place to be. We think it's the next hot place after the USA, some of the activity in Europe aside. And there's huge room to grow. Some of our competitors have also got activities, and I think we'll mutually grow and gain that value as an industry. And South Australian government's certainly helping in that regard.
You recently announced the maiden prospective resource assessment for the High Range project. What were the key findings, and what do they imply for the project's future?
Yes, you're exactly right. So we had an independent study assessment done over the last few months. Companies, risk associates that are probably familiar to a lot of your audience and yourself. They've established themselves as they've been around for a long while, and they've been providing some excellent services to oil and gas. Some of which has been trying to ground truth and give an independent judgment on resources and reserves. They've basically, over the last few years, they've adapted the established industry, oil and gas industry methodologies, and they've transposed those over to the natural hydrogen and helium world. And as I said, they've established themselves probably the leader globally in doing this sort of independent work. And the results have been really quite, very encouraging. So what they do is that they basically they look at the geology, they do their own fully independent interpretations. We provide some inputs and we obviously get the output, and it's quite comforting to see that our interpretation and theirs are very closely aligned, which is great. And then they use these processes to establish theoretically what amount of hydrogen and helium could be on the license. They look at the offset wells, they look at the prevalence of hydrogen and helium discoveries and shows in the area. They look at the geology, they look at analogs. They look at the size of leads and prospectivity that we have on the license, and then come up with a conservative, a middle case, and an optimistic, I suppose, best to describe it, range of volumes that you could get on the license, both for hydrogen and helium. So the key, obviously, you end up with a range of numbers. The key numbers are they call them 2U, sort of like a mid-case unrisked prospective resource for the license. And our on-block numbers for hydrogen, I think at 1071 BCF, so a little over a TCF of hydrogen. And because of our 80.2% holding of Go Exploration, we end up with about 842 BCF net to Thor, which is it's a big number, quite a big number, especially for hydrogen. These are numbers that you would start to get interested with if there were natural gas. Hydrogen obviously has better sales prices and probably a better future and other implications from its green credentials to give it give it value. And then from helium, another big number, 90 BCF net to Thor, which is the uses of helium on the planet. The amounts are a lot smaller. It's a high demand commodity, helium. There's not many places producing it, and essentially no industrial production of helium rather in Australia. So 90 BCF gives us a lot of running room, and if we find even just a fraction of that, we could potentially have very profitable business just purely from the helium. So we're excited about it. They're really good numbers. What we would expect, that from the company's understanding of the geology. So definitely, I think Rescue have done a good job. It definitely corroborates what we've seen independently, and that gives us that confidence to start investing money, to get onto the property, start doing the work program that's going to extend over the next 9 months to maybe 15 months, which will come out in drilling probably a couple of wells on the license.
In terms of geological modelling and exploration techniques, what innovative approaches are being used to, I suppose, better understand the subsurface potential for natural hydrogen and high range?
Yeah, it's a good question actually, and I think my job is to try and bring the best of oil and gas, tried and tested, proven methodologies, techniques, approaches to high range. But beyond that, we obviously have a cost focus. We're not Total and Shell that can afford to put huge amounts of money. So we constantly need to innovate for what is the most cost effective, highest value of information activities that we can do. The first thing we're planning to do is a geochemical survey starting actually just in May, in about 3 weeks' time. Actually, we'll be starting. What we're doing in that is actually just going out and drilling little holes into the ground, a meter and a half into the ground. It's called soil air analysis, and you're basically trying to pull the natural gases that are in those pore spaces in the soil, or if we're drilling into rock, if it's at the surface, the pore spaces in the rock, and try and hopefully find elevated shows of hydrogen and helium. It's quite a standard technique. There's not too much innovation about that. But what we're doing is we're putting a nuance on it. We're actually going to, for this case, we're actually going to mobilize a gas chromatography unit and take that out to the site with us. We'll be the first to do this, I believe, in Australia. I think someone might have done something similar to this in America. We're not quite sure, but it's probably the first time that it's being done in Australia. And by bringing that sensor to the field, as opposed to using a mass spectrometer, which might be a more standard approach, the gas chromatography, the GC unit, gives us much higher resolution. We should be able to find, parts per million of hydrogen and helium at site. It gives us all the benefits of, if we find, elevated response, we can go back and do a second sample. We can go a little bit deeper. We can move, away from that location by a few hundred meters or whatever it might be, to try and understand the spatial distribution of that anomaly in some details and kind of work on the fly. So this is quite a good, a lot of the cost of doing this is mobilizing the equipment to the field. So being out there and being able to, stick to your original plans, that we get a good coverage across the license, but also be fleet-footed enough to go back and ground truth what we've seen, try and understand and elucidate what that anomaly might look like. Hopefully relates to a prospect or migration pathways in the subsurface. That gives us something that's a different way of working that I don't think's really been done before. So innovation, even on something as simple as the soil air analysis, we can still innovate. We can still try and find cost improvements and hopefully liberate much better technical findings, rather than having to do the lower quality measurement in the field and then send gas samples off overseas to America to get studied. We do it all there. So we're innovating even on something as simple as that. We'll then, over the course of the next it could be 6 months, let's say that, we'll probably be going back into the field to do more of this work. We're going to hopefully enter some old water bores that go back 50, 100, 150 meters into the subsurface and take gas samples from those as well. Again, this is not necessarily something particularly new and innovative, but the combination of how we'll take all these different data sources and put them together with our gravity and magnetics understanding, some seismic, some other remote sensing techniques, will allow us to better understand the right places to eventually drill. Now we're going to be looking at some other esoteric techniques as well, which are options at the moment, and could involve different ways of looking at existing data sets and reprocessing those, doing some other techniques with remote sensing and sort of the clever, intelligent way of stacking and risking information should give us some other new angles as well on where we'll eventually want to drill. We will potentially go and acquire some 2D seismic data prior to drilling. We may not. It depends on. We've got some well-defined structures, relatively well-defined structures, which might allow us to go straight to drilling, and the cost is relatively low, so that could be a strategy. Alternatively, we might acquire some 2D as well. And we're looking at cost-effective ways of doing that. What's the best? What are the cheapest stroke best quality sources? What's the right geophone arrays and things like that? So we'll be adapting oil and gas methodology, mining methodology, and seeing how we can save costs, perhaps improve the quality of the data, and also better integrate that knowledge into our evaluation. And then ultimately, we're going to drill a couple of wells, maybe as early as the end of this year, probably more likely H1 next year. And again, we'll be looking at what are the right tools we can use. What can we bring from oil and gas? What can we bring that's already being used by the hydrogen helium industry globally? And what are some of the other downhole tools and measuring devices that we might be able to employ, again, to keep our cost base low, but also to hopefully give us more understanding of the subsurface. And if we make a discovery, then to help us understand how we'll develop that or appraise that, or indeed just to give us a better understanding of the regional geology and where we might want to go elsewhere in the license, or indeed elsewhere in our portfolio of license applications, to hunt again. So yeah, so lots of small innovations, and I think that's how a small company should work. It's not a case of inventing some fundamentally earth-changing technology. It's about being fleet-footed. It's about borrowing from other industries. It's about that implementation and of innovation, I think.
Yeah, certainly. Hydrogen and helium are increasingly viewed as obviously a critical energy and industrial resource. How does Thor Energy view the current and future market opportunities for these commodities? And what is High Range's potential route to commercialization?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not going to quote any numbers. There's so many studies out there that have been done by multinational corporations, international companies, small boutiques. They all point to a positive future for hydrogen. I think some people are very bullish, and we're going to have some wonderful global hydrogen economy. Maybe we will, but I sense that if that happens, it might be a little bit later than perhaps we were all envisaging a few years ago. But it's definitely a growing market. We need hydrogen for a variety of reasons. We need it for refining. We need it for petrochemicals. We need it for a lot of industrial applications. There's new industries which might be evolving. South Australia, there's obviously talk of green steel and things like that. A few hurdles needs to be crossed before the industry gets to that, but there is some hope. And then beyond that, though, I think that the main growth is in sort of transportation and the use of hydrogen as an energy store. Now we're in the natural hydrogen game. We're producing hydrogen. Well, we're not. The Earth is naturally producing the hydrogen. It's almost the cleanest energy source, right? It's coming out of the ground. We're not having to put any energy into it to produce the hydrogen. The only energy is to drill the wells and to extract it. As compare that to green hydrogen, where you actually have to use wind or solar to create the electrons, to hydrolyze the water, or do some other kind of membrane related production of hydrogen. It's very energy intensive. It's very cost intensive. Yeah, it has issues with supply chain and other things. And then, of course, the other side of current hydrogen production is dirtier. It's mostly grey hydrogen using methane, natural gas, to produce the hydrogen. Again, produces a lot of carbon dioxide as a byproduct, and there's coal still used as well, which is perhaps even dirtier. So the industry as a whole for hydrogen, I think the market as a whole is going to grow, but there's also a room for the desire for greener hydrogen to grow. And when I mean green, that's green hydrogen sensu stricto, using renewable energy to do it, but it also allows for this white gold hydrogen, as they call it, or natural hydrogen, as we prefer to call it, to fill that void and really start to take over increasing market share within that hydrogen space. So potentially a vast market, potentially a market that we'll never actually be able to fulfill purely just from a natural hydrogen point of view, but so plenty of room to grow into. So that's not really the issue from a global point of view. As I mentioned earlier, we're in South Australia. We've got local markets and local ability to tap into that as well. So there's very few barriers to the commercialization of our high range project if we want to make a discovery. Excuse me. Excuse me. Helium is also is a highly used chemical. It's amazing that you only look into just how many walks of life this stuff is used. It's also quite rare. I mean, it's abundant in the universe. It's quite rare on Earth. It's produced in the Earth and through some natural processes that are happening deep inside the Earth. And in Australia, in particular, Australia used to be a net exporter of helium until a couple of years ago, where it was produced as a sort of a byproduct of some natural gas production up in the Australian Northwest Shelf via Darwin. A couple of years ago, they stopped the production of that for a variety of reasons, mostly to do with the natural gas as opposed to the helium. So it means that Australia at the moment has no large-scale production of helium. So again, it's an open door if we can find some helium to produce it and sell it into the market. The hydrogen is difficult at scale to transport. Helium is relatively easier. You still potentially liquefy it and condense it, but it's a much smaller volumes compared to the hydrogen. So the market is there and growing. So yeah, I think we see huge potential, and we see that we're poised in the right place geologically, and also from that market side of things.
Looking ahead, what are the company's next milestones for the High Range project? And also, what are the time frames that we can expect? Obviously, further updates.
Yeah, well, yeah. I sort of alluded to some of them earlier, so I'll try not to repeat myself in too much detail. But we're going to go out to the field in a month's time. I'll probably make an announcement associated with just getting us out into the field, beginning of May, end of May, beginning of June. Hopefully, we have some results, and we'll obviously be communicating those. And also at that time or shortly afterwards, we'll have a much clearer trajectory of the following 6 to 12 months, and how we're going to get to drilling wells, whether we're going to be just go straight for it, get straight into well planning and permitting and drilling, or whether we'll be doing some additional geochemistry work, maybe some seismic or other, maybe some desktop work as well based on existing data sets. And we'll be setting that pathway out very clearly at that point. And then that leads us to doing the activity. So there may be announcements across that Q3 timeframe, but otherwise we'll be releasing announcements associated with getting well ready for well preparation, awarding of contracts, expected spud dates, and ultimately potentially late this year, but more likely next year, announcements associated with drilling and hopefully some positive results. And in the meantime, I've mentioned it and just in passing, we're focused heavily on our High Range project, which is this license that sits immediately north of Adelaide. But we also have a portfolio of license applications, which are currently going through native title negotiations before they're awarded. They're moving through quite swiftly. Well, let's say that. And the southern two licenses, which are over in the northern part of the Eyre Peninsula in South Australia, are leading the charge on that. So I'm hoping later this year, maybe again early next year, those licenses will be awarded. It'll increase our portfolio of active licenses. And we'll start to, it'll work out timing wise, be quite nice, because some of the learnings that we get from our High Range license will start to bleed in and inform how we're going to work through the work program of those. So all of those are going to happen over the next, as I say, 9, 12 months. You'll see that news flow. And then on the mineral side of things, the mineral exploration side of things, there could potentially be some announcements depending on additional work that's done on some of those licenses, or potentially some commercial activity as well.
And finally, beyond the High Range project, what are the company's plans regarding its current portfolio, and can we expect further opportunities into other minerals, both in Australia and internationally?
Yeah, I think so. Our existing mineral exploration portfolio, we're looking at, we'll say we're high grading, and we'll see how they boil out. I think that we'll end up with a rationalization of that mineral exploration portfolio definitely over the coming year or perhaps beyond. Whether that's we end up with a small number of these, I'm not quite sure. We need to do that evaluation, but we'll be looking to, for anything we do get rid of, we'll be looking for good deals to really capture some value out of that. The main focus of the company is definitely on hydrogen, natural hydrogen, and helium. And at least in the short term, that focus is going to be Australia. It's going to be probably South Australia. We might look to other opportunities slightly farther afield, but we've got quite a large portfolio that with this Go exploration transaction. I mean, the high range project we have is 6,400 square kilometers. It's vast. You could fit 100 North American US blocks into this easily, perhaps more. So it's a vast tract of land, and we've really got a lot of work, a lot of opportunity on that license, just that one license. And then, as I say, we've got these exploration applications as well. They're even bigger. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but we're into the tens of thousands of square kilometers. So we already have a vast portfolio. We think it's sitting in some of the most prospective acreage on the planet, really. And I think that's going to keep us busy. We can see a lot of room for the company to grow in terms of resourcing and starting to get after these work programs. I think M&A and other activities will happen in the industry, and we'll see how that might interact with the industry at large and could influence things. But I can see a very large organic growth and scaling of the company just with the existing portfolio. But there's opportunities to probably increase that. I think there'll be opportunities to potentially go into a joint venture approach, either by farm in or conversely. And I think the industry, hopefully, and I sense this, we're going to start getting a lot more attention, steal some of that attention, bring some of that attention over from the US, from Europe, from parts of Asia as well, as people start to get more familiar with what natural hydrogen is and its potential, and want to sort of be fast followers from the North American and European activities. And I think we're perfectly poised for that. So let's see how it all evolves. I think it's going to be a really interesting, dynamic market, and there's going to be a lot of organic work happening as well at the moment, say with our work program, eventually leading to drilling. So it's going to be a very exciting industry to look at over the coming months.
Andrew, thank you for coming on the podcast, telling us all about Thor Energy and speaking about hydrogen and helium and your high range project as well. So thank you for sharing your journey and informing our audience of what you're looking to achieve in the industry. If our audience wants to reach out to you, if they want to follow the story, what social media platform channels on, and how can people get in contact?
Yes, please do. I'm always interested in people showing interest in this sector and our company. So we've got a website. You can go to thorenergyplc.com. All the information's on there, contact information, and then obviously we have a X and LinkedIn page which you can find with the same prompts very easily. So please reach out.
Yeah, we'll include those all in the show notes accompanying this podcast for easy access. So thank you for your time. Wish you well with everything and the high range project, and hopefully you can come on next year and give us an update on what you've achieved.
I'd like that. Thanks for your time, Rob. Pleasure being on the pod. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Hope you enjoyed that episode. As always, appreciate your continued support. Please keep sharing these episodes far and wide. And as always say, not just people within our industry, but people outside of mining. We want to, I suppose, make aware of what our industry is about, and we can only do that through greater reach and not just sharing this within our industry, but people outside of the mining industry. So hope you enjoyed that episode. As always, thank you for your support. And until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.